My name is Eleanor, I'm 67 years old, and I spent my life as a nurse caring for others, especially the 2 children I raised alone after my husband died. Then a car accident changed everything. As I lay broken in a hospital bed, my children told doctors, "She's not our real mom, we owe her nothing." The ultimate betrayal. A week later, they returned, hoping to claim what I owned, but found only an empty bed and a letter. What they didn't know was that I had finally found my voice. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Take a moment to drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and truth. You might be surprised how this ends. I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts, where everyone knew everyone's business. After nursing school, I landed a job at our local hospital where I met Thomas, my husband. He was brought in with a broken arm after a construction accident, and I was assigned to his care. His kind smile and gentle manner caught my attention immediately. We started dating after he recovered, and within a year, we were married in a simple ceremony in my parents' backyard. Life seemed perfect when Jessica came along 2 years later. She had Thomas's blue eyes and my stubborn determination. Michael followed 18 months after that. A quieter baby with thoughtful expressions who observed everything. Thomas worked construction while I continued nursing part-time. We weren't wealthy, but we were happy in our modest 3-bedroom home on Maple Street. Then came the morning that shattered our family. Thomas collapsed while getting ready for work. A massive heart attack took him at 36. Just like that, I became a widow with 2 small children. Jessica only 8 and Michael barely 6. They were too young to fully understand, but old enough to feel the devastating loss of their father. The financial reality hit immediately. Thomas had minimal life insurance, barely enough to cover the funeral expenses. The mortgage, car payments, and daily expenses fell entirely on my shoulders. I had no choice but to return to full-time nursing, then picking up extra shifts whenever possible. My mother helped with childcare when she could, but her own health was failing. Those years blur together in my memory. I'd work overnight shifts, come home to get the kids ready for school, sleep for a few hours, then be up again to meet them when they returned. Dinner, homework, bedtime stories, then back to the hospital. I missed school plays and parent-teacher conferences. I learned to function on 4 hours of sleep and leftover cafeteria food. The sacrifices were endless but necessary. I canceled our cable subscription, learned to repair clothes instead of replacing them, and became an expert at stretching a pound of ground beef across 3 meals. Many nights I claimed I'd already eaten at the hospital when in truth, I was making sure Jessica and Michael had enough food. Despite the hardships, we had moments of joy. I remember Jessica's 10th birthday when I surprised her with the bicycle she'd been eyeing for months. I had sold my wedding ring to afford it, but her squeals of delight made it worthwhile. For Michael's 9th birthday, his friends came over for a homemade pizza party. He later told me it was his favorite birthday ever, never knowing I had worked 7 consecutive night shifts to afford the ingredients and small gifts. As the children entered their teenage years, I noticed subtle changes in Jessica first. The sweet girl who once left handmade cards under my pillow began comparing our home to her friends' larger houses. The gratitude that once characterized her personality slowly transformed into entitlement. She questioned why we couldn't afford brand-name clothes or vacations like her classmates' families. "Mom, Brittany's parents are taking her to Disney World for spring break," she complained one evening while doing homework at our kitchen table. "We never go anywhere." "We're saving for your college, sweetie," I explained. "That's more important than vacations right now." She rolled her eyes, a gesture that became increasingly common. "College is years away. What about now?" Michael, always the follower, began mimicking his sister's attitudes. The boy who once hugged me tightly every night before bed grew distant, spending more time with friends whose parents had boats and summer homes. Despite their changing attitudes, I remained determined to give them opportunities one never had. I worked extra holidays and weekends, putting every spare dollar into their college funds. My own retirement account remained empty. My future could wait. Their education couldn't. When Jessica graduated high school with honors, I felt a surge of pride watching her accept her diploma. All those missed dinners and postponed dreams had been worth it. She received a partial scholarship to State University, but I still needed to cover thousands in tuition and housing costs. I took out a small home equity loan, telling myself it was a worthwhile investment in her future. Michael followed 2 years later, choosing a private university that stretched our finances even thinner. I sold my car and started taking the bus to work to help cover his expenses. Neither child seemed to notice or appreciate these sacrifices. Their calls home became less frequent, usually coinciding with requests for additional money for books or unexpected expenses. During Jessica's junior year, I drove 5 hours to surprise her for her 21st birthday. When I arrived at her dormitory with a small cake and gift, her roommate informed me she was at a party. I waited for 3 hours in the lobby before she stumbled in with friends, clearly intoxicated. "Mom!" Her surprise quickly turned to annoyance. "What are you doing here?" "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said, holding out the slightly melted cake. "I thought we could celebrate together." She glanced at her friends, embarrassment evident on her face. "You should have called first. I have plans tonight." I ended up driving back home that same night, the untouched cake on the passenger seat beside me. Michael's reaction to my visits became similarly lukewarm, often cutting our time together short to meet with friends or attend parties. Still, I continued supporting them financially and emotionally, hoping they were just going through a phase. I told myself that once they matured and started their own careers, they would understand and appreciate what I had done. I never imagined how wrong I could be. Jessica graduated with a business degree and quickly landed a job at a marketing firm in Boston. Within her first year there, she met Andrew, the son of the company's CEO. Their relationship moved quickly, and before I knew it, she was calling to announce their engagement. I was thrilled for her happiness but concerned when she described the elaborate wedding they were planning. "The venue alone costs $30,000, she gushed over the phone. "And wait until you see my dress." "That sounds wonderful," I replied, mentally calculating how many shifts I would need to work to contribute meaningfully to such an event. "I've been saving a little for your wedding day. I can help with some of the expenses." There was a pause on the line. "Actually, Mom, Andrew's parents are covering everything. They want to do it properly." The implication that my contribution wouldn't be proper stung, but I pushed the feeling aside. "Well, I'd still like to help with something. Maybe the rehearsal dinner." "They've already booked the yacht club for that," she said quickly. "But you know what? You could help with my bridal shower. Something small and intimate." In the end, I wasn't even invited to plan the shower. Jessica's future mother-in-law, Victoria, organized an extravagant event at an exclusive country club. When I arrived in my best dress, a navy blue number I'd worn to church for years, I overheard Victoria commenting to another guest. "That's Jessica's mother. Raised her alone apparently. A nurse or something." Throughout the event, Jessica barely introduced me to anyone, keeping me at the periphery of conversations. When pictures were taken, she positioned me at the end of the group, easily cropped out later. I tried to tell myself she was just busy with so many guests, but the truth was becoming clearer with each passing hour. The wedding itself was a spectacle of wealth and excess. 500 guests in a historic mansion, ice sculptures at every table, and a 7-tier cake that could have fed a small village. I sat in the front row during the ceremony as tradition dictated, but at the reception, I found my name card at a table in the far corner with distant relatives and the staff photographer. Michael, who had become increasingly under Jessica's influence, spent the evening networking with Andrew's connections rather than sitting with me. He had moved to Seattle after college for a tech job, and our communication had dwindled to occasional text messages and obligatory holiday calls. As Jessica settled into married life, her transformation continued. She moved into Andrew's penthouse apartment, joined the right clubs, and carefully curated her social media presence to reflect her new status. Photos of exotic vacations and charity galas filled her profiles, but there was never any mention of her background or me. My attempts to maintain our relationship met with polite resistance. Invitations to visit were met with excuses about busy schedules. When I did visit, Jessica seemed uncomfortable showing me around their luxurious home. "Please don't tell any of Andrew's friends about your job at the county hospital," she instructed during one visit. "If they ask, just say you're retired." Why would I lie about my work? I asked, genuinely confused. I've helped thousands of people over my career. She sighed as if explaining something to a child. It's just not the kind of background that fits with our circle. Andrew's friends' parents are all executives and professionals. The pain of those words cut deep. I had spent my entire adult life dedicated to healing and caring for others, often at the expense of my own needs. Now my daughter was suggesting I should be ashamed of this. Michael's visits home became equally rare. When I asked about coming to Seattle to see his apartment, he always had an excuse. The place is a mess right now, Mom. I'm traveling that week for work. Why don't we meet halfway instead? We never did. One Christmas I found myself completely alone. Jessica had taken a holiday cruise with Andrew's family. Michael had chosen to go skiing with friends in Colorado. I had decorated a small tree and wrapped presents for both of them, which still sit unopened in their childhood closets. I spent the day looking through old photo albums, wondering where I had gone wrong. My neighbor Diane noticed me sitting alone on my porch that evening and invited me over for leftovers. Unlike my children, she seemed to value my company and the stories from my nursing career. She became the friend I desperately needed during this period of rejection. They don't know what they're missing, Diane said as we shared pie and coffee. You're one of the strongest, kindest women I know. Despite my children's distance, I continued to support them when they needed it. When Michael called about being short on the down payment for his condo, I withdrew $4,000 from my modest retirement account. When Jessica's car needed unexpected repairs while Andrew was on a business trip, I sent her $3,000 without hesitation. The final blow came when I discovered Jessica's elaborate baby shower photos on social media. My first grandchild had been celebrated without my knowledge or invitation. When I called to congratulate her, she seemed annoyed by my hurt feelings. It was just a small gathering with Andrew's family and our close friends, she explained, though the photo showed at least 50 guests in attendance. We didn't want to make you travel all that way for just an afternoon. That night I cried myself to sleep, clutching a baby blanket I had knitted for my future grandchild, a gift I would likely never have the chance to give. Life has a way of testing us when we're already at our lowest. 3 months after discovering I had been excluded from Jessica's baby shower, I was driving home from a late shift at the hospital. Rain pounded against my windshield and visibility was poor. I was tired, having worked a double shift to cover for a colleague with the flu. Just 2 miles from home it happened. Headlights suddenly blinded me as a truck swerved across the center line. I jerked the wheel to avoid a head-on collision, but my car hydroplaned on the wet pavement. The world spun in sickening circles before I felt the impact of hitting the guardrail. Metal crunched, glass shattered, and then came another hit as a car behind me couldn't stop in time. I don't remember much after that. Flashing lights, voices shouting, the metallic taste of blood. Pain radiating from everywhere. A paramedic leaning close, telling me to stay awake. Then darkness. I woke up in the hospital, surrounded by beeping machines and the antiseptic smell I knew so well from decades of working in similar rooms. Trying to move sent shooting pain through my body. A nurse I recognized from the surgical floor noticed I was awake and came to my side. "Eleanor, you're at County General. You've been in a serious accident," she explained gently. "You have multiple fractures in your right leg and arm, 4 broken ribs, and some internal bleeding that required surgery. The doctor will be in soon to explain everything." I tried to speak, but my throat was raw from the breathing tube they had just removed. She offered me ice chips and continued. "We've been trying to contact your emergency contacts. Your daughter and son are listed here." I nodded weakly, hope flickering that perhaps this crisis would bring my children back to me. Surely they would come now when I truly needed them. The nurse, Sarah, left to call the doctor. As I drifted in and out of consciousness, I became aware of her voice just outside my door. She was on the phone, presumably with one of my children. I couldn't see her, but I could hear every word clearly. "Yes, this is County General Hospital. I'm calling regarding Eleanor Bennett. She's been in a serious car accident and is in critical condition." "Yes, that's correct. She has you listed as her emergency contact." There was a pause as the person on the other end responded. Then Sarah's tone changed, confusion evident in her voice. "I'm sorry, but our records show you as Jessica Bennett, her daughter. You're saying that's not correct." Another pause, longer this time. My heart began racing, causing the monitor beside me to beep more rapidly. I see, Sarah continued, her voice now cool and professional. So you're saying, she's not our real mom, we were adopted, we owe her nothing. Is that correct? The words hit me like physical blows, each one stealing my breath more effectively than my broken ribs. I had raised Jessica from birth. There had never been any adoption. This was a blatant lie to avoid responsibility. Well, regardless of your relationship, she's in serious condition and has no other emergency contacts listed. No, I understand. Thank you for your time. Tears streamed down my face as I heard Sarah hang up the phone. Through the gap in the door, I could see her standing there, the receiver still in her hand, a look of disbelief on her face. She made another call, presumably to Michael, but I couldn't bear to hear his response. I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep when she returned to check on me. The physical pain of my injuries was nothing compared to the searing betrayal I felt. I had given these children everything. Every extra shift, every missed vacation, every gray hair on my head was for them. And in my moment of greatest need, they had not only abandoned me but denied me entirely. Later that day, Diane somehow discovered I was in the hospital. Unlike my children, she came immediately, gasping when she saw the extent of my injuries. "Oh, Eleanor," she whispered, carefully taking my uninjured hand. "I've been so worried. You didn't show up for our morning coffee, and then I saw the accident on the local news." "My children," I managed to say, my voice raspy and weak. "They won't come." Diane's expression darkened. "What do you mean?" When I explained what I had overheard, her face flushed with anger. "That's despicable. After everything you've done for them." The next few days passed in a blur of pain medications, doctor visits, and surgeries. I learned that my injuries were even more extensive than initially thought. My right leg required pins and would need months of physical therapy. My internal bleeding had been severe enough to require the removal of my spleen. Recovery would be long and difficult. Sarah, the nurse who had made the calls to my children, became a surprising ally. Though she never directly mentioned the phone conversations, she took special care with me, often staying past her shift to ensure I was comfortable. "I've been a nurse for 20 years, she told me one evening while changing my bandages, "and I believe family is more than blood. It's who shows up when you need them." She glanced meaningfully at Diane, who had visited every day, bringing small comforts from home and advocating fiercely with doctors on my behalf. A week after my admission, Diane brought my mail to the hospital. Among the bills and junk mail was a letter from my insurance company. My policy included a substantial payout in case of disability or death, something I had maintained faithfully to provide for my children if anything happened to me. Jessica and Michael were still listed as the sole beneficiaries. That night, as pain kept me awake despite medication, a realization slowly formed in my mind. My children had abandoned me in my time of need, believing there was nothing to gain. But what would happen if they thought there was an inheritance to claim? The thought made me sick, but I needed to know. Was there any love left, or had it always been about what I could provide? 3 weeks in the hospital gave me plenty of time to think. My body was healing slowly, but my heart remained shattered. The betrayal by Jessica and Michael had forced me to reconsider everything I thought I knew about family and love. Diane visited daily, bringing homemade soup and updates from the neighborhood. During one visit, she mentioned something that caught my attention. "I ran into Sarah at the grocery store," she said while arranging fresh flowers by my bedside. "She mentioned someone called asking about your condition yesterday." I looked up sharply. "My children." Diane nodded. "A woman who identified herself as your daughter. Sarah said she didn't ask about your comfort or pain levels, just your status and timeline." The clinical nature of these inquiries spoke volumes. Not is my mother suffering, but essentially, how long until this is over? Later that afternoon, a hospital social worker came to discuss my discharge planning. Given my limited mobility and the stairs in my home, I would need significant assistance or temporary placement in a rehabilitation facility. "Do you have family who can help with your recovery?" she asked gently. The question brought fresh pain. "No, Iraplia. No family." She made a note in my file. We'll arrange for home health services and possibly a short stay in a skilled nursing facility then. That evening, a distinguished gray-haired man knocked on my door. He introduced himself as Marcus Daniels, an attorney Diane had contacted on my behalf. Mrs. Bennett, Diane mentioned you might need some legal advice regarding your estate planning, he said, pulling a chair close to my bed. I explained my situation, including the heartbreaking phone calls my children had made. Marcus listened attentively, his expression growing increasingly concerned. Unfortunately, I've seen similar situations before, he said. When money is involved, people sometimes reveal their true characters. He asked about my assets, which I had never considered substantial. There was my home, nearly paid off after 30 years of mortgage payments. My modest retirement account. The life insurance policy. Some stocks I had purchased with small bonuses over the years. You've been a careful saver, Marcus observed after reviewing my financial documents. More than you realize. Your home has appreciated considerably in this market, and those blue-chip stocks have performed well over time. He estimated my estate at just over $800,000, a sum that shocked me. A lifetime of small sacrifices had added up to more than I imagined. And currently, your children are the sole beneficiaries of everything? He confirmed. I nodded, the irony bitter in my mouth. The same children who had abandoned me stood to inherit everything I had built. I'd like to make some changes, I said firmly. Marcus explained my options. I could revise my will, redirect my life insurance policy, even consider setting up a trust with specific conditions. As we talked, a plan began forming in my mind. The next morning, a young nurse's aide was helping me wash my hair when she mentioned something interesting. A man called the nurse's station asking very specific questions about your prognosis, she said. He identified himself as your son but didn't give his name. Wanted to know if you had discussed end-of-life care. I felt a chill despite the warm water. What did you tell him? Nothing, she replied indignantly. Patient information is confidential. Plus, Sarah had flagged your chart with a note about unauthorized family inquiries. That afternoon, I overheard two nurses discussing me just outside my room. The daughter called again, one said quietly. Asked about the mother's life insurance policy. If the hospital had any information about it. Unbelievable, the other replied. Doesn't even visit, but wants to know about insurance. Their conversation confirmed what I needed to know. My children were circling, not out of concern but anticipation. When Marcus returned the next day, I had made my decision. I want to teach them one final lesson, I explained. About consequences, about the true meaning of family. Together we crafted a new will. The house would be sold, with proceeds going to a nursing scholarship at the hospital where I'd worked for decades. My savings would be divided between Diane, who had shown me true friendship, and a fund for elderly patients without family support. My insurance policy would now benefit a children's hospital, with a small stipend set aside for Sarah, whose kindness had been a balm during my darkest days. For Jessica and Michael, I left token inheritances of $1,000 each, along with letters explaining my decision. Legally, this was enough to show I hadn't forgotten them, making the will more difficult to contest. The most challenging part was drafting those letters. I spent days thinking about what to say, how to express decades of love and disappointment in a few paragraphs. Marcus advised keeping them brief and factual, but I needed my children to understand the weight of their choices. As my discharge date approached, the hospital chaplain visited. I confided in him about my plan, worried it came from a place of vengeance rather than justice. Forgiveness doesn't mean allowing people to continue harming you, he said thoughtfully. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is allow people to experience the consequences of their actions. That's how we grow. His words reassured me. This wasn't about punishment but about truth. For too long, I had enabled their behavior, making excuses and accepting scraps of attention. It was time for all of us to face reality. The final piece of my plan came together when Marcus mentioned a private care facility in a neighboring town where a colleague of his served as administrator. They could admit me under a pseudonym for privacy, allowing me to recover in peace while completing my legal arrangements. And what about the hospital? I asked. When my children eventually show up looking for me or my assets? Marcus smiled slightly. I believe we can arrange something appropriate. The transfer to Riverside Care Center happened quietly. Officially, I remained a patient at County General, but physically, I was recovering in a private room 30 miles away. Marcus had arranged everything, ensuring my privacy and safety. Diane brought clothes and personal items from my home, setting up my room with familiar photographs and my favorite quilt. The staff at Riverside were informed of my situation and the need for discretion. My physical therapy began in earnest, each painful session bringing me closer to independence. Meanwhile, Marcus put our plan into motion. Through carefully placed comments to hospital administrative staff, a rumor began circulating about my deteriorating condition. Nothing specific, nothing that would constitute medical fraud, just vague concerns about complications and poor prognosis. Sarah, who had become invested in my case, agreed to help with the final stage. She would contact me immediately if Jessica or Michael finally decided to make an appearance. The call came 10 days after my transfer. Sarah's voice was tight with controlled anger when she phoned. "They're here," she said simply. "Both of them. Asking about your condition and whether you've discussed your will with anyone. How do they look?" I asked, curious despite myself. "Concerned but not grieving," Sarah replied. "Your daughter is wearing designer everything and keeps checking her watch. Your son seems uncomfortable, barely making eye contact with staff." According to Sarah, they had arrived separately but within an hour of each other. Jessica had brought flowers that cost more than I made in a day as a nurse. Michael had a card but had left it in his car and never returned with it. Most tellingly, they had immediately asked to speak with my doctors about my status and whether I had mentioned any arrangements. "They're talking to Dr. Patterson now," Sarah continued. "He knows the situation and is being appropriately vague about your condition." The next day, Marcus visited me at Riverside with an update. He had strategically encountered Jessica and Michael at the hospital, introducing himself as a patient advocate who had been working with me. "They practically cornered me in the hallway," he reported with a hint of satisfaction. "Asked if I knew anything about your will or life insurance. I explained that we had indeed discussed your wishes extensively." Their reaction, according to Marcus, was immediate interest disguised as concern. "Your daughter actually said, 'Mom always wanted us to be taken care of,' as if she was establishing her claim. I felt a strange detachment hearing this, as if we were discussing characters in a novel rather than my own children. The pain was still there but more distant now, obscured by resolve. The following day, Diane drove me back to County General, where I was disguised with a wig and glasses. From a waiting area across from my supposed room, I watched as Jessica and Michael arrived for another visit. Their behavior was revealing. Jessica entered my room first, spending only moments at the empty bed before opening the small closet and bedside drawers, clearly searching for something. Michael stood awkwardly by the door, occasionally checking the hallway as if standing lookout. When a nurse entered, Jessica immediately adopted a mournful expression, asking detailed questions about my condition and treatment. The nurse, aware of the situation, gave non-committal answers while Michael shifted uncomfortably behind his sister. As they left the room and walked down the hallway, I could hear snippets of their conversation. "The house has to be worth at least $300,000 in this market," Jessica was saying. "What about her retirement accounts?" Michael asked. "She always said she was saving for us. We'll need to find her financial documents. They must be at the house." Their voices faded as they turned the corner, but I had heard enough. Any lingering doubt about their motivations vanished. This wasn't about love or even duty. It was about what they could gain from my death. That evening, Marcus finalized our arrangements. Sarah would help stage the empty bed scenario, complete with the letters I had written. The hospital administration, disturbed by my children's behavior, had agreed to cooperate with what they viewed as a justified lesson in consequences. As I was driven back to Riverside, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. For decades, I had given everything to my children, receiving less and less in return. Now I was finally putting myself first, and it felt both terrifying and liberating. In my room that night, I looked at old photographs of Jessica and Michael as children. Their innocent smiles, the trust in their eyes as they looked at me, the mother who would do anything for them. I wondered when and how that trust had transformed into entitlement, and eventually contempt. Had I enabled their behavior by giving too much? Had my sacrifices taught them that love means endless taking without reciprocation? These questions had no simple answers, but I knew that continuing the pattern would help none of us. The stage was set. Tomorrow, Jessica and Michael would arrive at the hospital expecting to find their mother either deceased or close to it. Instead, they would find an empty bed and the truth they had spent years avoiding. The call from Sarah came just after noon the next day. Jessica and Michael had arrived at the hospital together, a rare show of sibling unity driven by shared financial interest. They had asked to speak with Dr. Patterson urgently, claiming they needed to discuss end-of-life decisions for their mother. According to the plan, Dr. Patterson had gravely informed them that there had been a significant development overnight. He directed them to my room, where Sarah was waiting outside the door. "Your daughter actually practiced her sad face in the reflection of the elevator doors," Sarah reported with undisguised disgust. "Then she asked me if there was a hospital administrator they could speak with about your personal effects before they even entered the room." Inside, they found the bed empty, neatly made, with 2 sealed envelopes placed on the pillow. Sarah had positioned herself where she could observe their reactions without being obvious. "The son opened his letter first," she told me. His face went completely white. The daughter grabbed hers and started reading aloud, her voice getting louder with each sentence. By the end, she was practically screaming. The letters were nearly identical, explaining that I had overheard their phone conversations when the hospital first contacted them. I detailed the pain of hearing my own children deny me, followed by their transparent interest in my estate once they realized there might be money involved. I informed them of my new will, the token inheritances they would receive, and my hope that this experience would teach them something about the true meaning of family and love. "Your brother actually had tears in his eyes," Sarah continued. "But your daughter just kept saying, 'She can't do this. It's our money.'" Dr. Patterson had entered then, explaining that I had been transferred to a private facility for my recovery, and had left strict instructions that my location remain confidential. When Jessica demanded information about my financial arrangements, he simply referred her to Marcus. The scene that followed at Marcus's office was relayed to me later that afternoon when he visited Riverside. Jessica had stormed in without an appointment, Michael trailing behind looking increasingly uncomfortable. She threatened to sue everyone involved, Marcus recalled, seeming more amused than concerned. "The hospital for hiding you, me for undue influence. Even Sarah for conspiracy." When I explained that everything had been done legally, and with your full mental capacity documented by multiple medical professionals, she became even more irate. Michael, according to Marcus, had remained largely silent until Jessica began making wild accusations about me being manipulated or mentally incompetent. "He actually told her to stop at that point," Marcus said. "Said that you were the most competent, hardworking person they knew. And that was part of the problem. They had taken advantage of that their entire lives." This unexpected defense from my son sent a small flicker of hope through me. Perhaps there was still something there. Some recognition of the truth buried beneath years of selfishness. Over the next few days, the ripple effects of my decision spread through my children's lives. Diane, who maintained connections with mutual acquaintances, brought occasional updates. Jessica's carefully curated social image began crumbling when the story leaked among hospital staff. Several nurses who had witnessed her behavior shared their disgust with friends, and soon the gossip reached members of her exclusive social circle. The woman who had been building her identity on family values and charity work was exposed as someone who had abandoned her injured mother, and then attempted to claim her estate. According to Diane, Andrew had been genuinely shocked by Jessica's behavior. He had been raised in wealth but also with strong family values, and his mother had been deeply involved in hospital charities for years. The revelation that Jessica had denied her relationship to me to avoid responsibility had appalled him and his family. "There's talk that he's consulting with a divorce attorney," Diane reported. Apparently, he always thought Jessica's rags to riches story was part of her charm. Finding out how she really treated you has changed how he sees her. Michael's situation evolved differently. His girlfriend of 3 years, Rachel, had been with him when he received my letter. Unlike Jessica, Michael had actually read it aloud to Rachel, including the painful details of how he had abandoned me after the accident. "Rachel called me," Diane said, surprising me. "She got my number from the hospital. She said Michael has been a mess since that day at the hospital. Apparently, he broke down and told her everything, including how he's followed Jessica's lead for years regarding your relationship." This news stirred complicated feelings. I hadn't crafted my plan to destroy my children's lives or relationships, only to protect myself and perhaps shock them into recognition of their behavior. The thought of Michael's suffering brought me no pleasure, but the fact that he was confronting his actions gave me hope that something valuable might emerge from this painful episode. Jessica made several attempts to locate me, even hiring a private investigator who was promptly turned away by Riverside Security. She also consulted with 3 different attorneys about contesting my will, but each one explained that I had followed legal requirements perfectly, leaving her no grounds for challenge. Michael took a different approach. He sent a handwritten letter addressed to me, care of Marcus, who brought it during his next visit. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. "You don't have to read it now," Marcus said gently, "or ever if you prefer. But I needed to know." The letter inside was 10 pages long, the handwriting sometimes shaky, with visible tear stains on several pages. Michael began by acknowledging the pain he had caused, making no excuses for his behavior. He traced the gradual erosion of our relationship, admitting how he had followed Jessica's lead in pulling away, partially from jealousy of her new lifestyle and partially from shame about his own ingratitude. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he wrote toward the end. "I don't even deserve the $1,000 you're leaving me. What I did was unforgivable. But I want you to know that I understand now what you did for us, all those years of sacrifice that we never appreciated. I'm not asking to see you or for you to respond. I just needed you to know that your final lesson wasn't wasted on me." I read the letter 3 times, emotions washing over me in waves. There was pain certainly, but also a glimmer of something like hope. Not for an immediate reconciliation, but for the possibility that at least one of my children might become a better person through this experience. As news of my story spread through the hospital community, I received an unexpected outpouring of support. Cards and small gifts arrived from nurses and doctors I had worked with over the decades, many sharing similar stories of family estrangement or ingratitude. Sarah organized a collection to buy me a comfortable recliner for my room at Riverside, making my physical therapy sessions more bearable. The scholarship fund I had established with my home's future proceeds already had additional donations from colleagues who appreciated its purpose. What had begun as a painful lesson for my children was evolving into something more meaningful, a legacy that reflected my lifelong commitment to caring for others. 6 weeks after my accident, I was strong enough to consider my next steps. The physical injuries were healing, but more importantly, I had begun to heal emotionally. For the first time in decades, I was making decisions based solely on what I wanted and needed, not on my children's expectations or demands. The freedom was both terrifying and exhilarating. My physical recovery progressed faster than the doctors had initially predicted. Perhaps it was the removal of emotional burden, or simply the exceptional care at Riverside, but within 3 months of the accident, I was walking with only a slight limp. The pins in my leg would remain, a permanent reminder of that rainy night that had changed everything, but the pain had subsided to manageable levels. With Marcus's help, I sold my house without ever returning to it. Diane packed my personal belongings, and I decided which items to keep and which to donate. The furnishings that had witnessed decades of family history, both joyful and painful, would benefit families in need through a local charity. Using a portion of the proceeds, I purchased a small 2-bedroom condominium in a retirement community 30 miles from my former home. The building had elevators, wide doorways, and an active social calendar, all perfect for my new circumstances. Most importantly, it represented a fresh start. Diane helped me decorate, incorporating favorite pieces from my old home while adding new elements that reflected this chapter of my life. For the first time, I chose furniture based solely on my preferences, not on durability for children or practicality for a busy working mother. "This place is so you, Eleanor," Diane remarked as we arranged photographs on a bookshelf. I noticed she had tactfully left out most pictures of Jessica and Michael, focusing instead on my parents, nursing graduation, and travels with Diane herself. I added one photo of my children from when they were young, before the distance grew between us. Not to dwell on the past, but to acknowledge it as part of my journey. With my physical needs addressed, I turned my attention to rebuilding my sense of purpose. Throughout my career, helping others had defined me. Retirement had always seemed like a distant concept, something I would worry about after my children were established. Now, with unexpected time and freedom, I needed to redefine myself. The answer came during a follow-up appointment at County General. While waiting in the pediatric wing, I observed an elderly volunteer reading to children receiving cancer treatments. The joy on their faces as she animated different characters in the story touched something deep within me. The volunteer coordinator was thrilled when I inquired about opportunities. My nursing background made me especially valuable, and soon I was spending 3 mornings a week at the children's hospital. I read stories, played games, and sometimes simply held tiny hands during procedures when parents couldn't be present. The work was emotionally demanding but deeply fulfilling. Through the hospital volunteer program, I connected with other retired healthcare professionals. We formed an informal support group, meeting weekly for coffee and conversation. Unlike my children, these new friends valued my experiences and wisdom. We shared stories from our careers, discussed current healthcare challenges, and supported each other through the transitions of aging. As my social circle expanded, I discovered interests I had never had time to explore. A watercolor class at the community center revealed a modest artistic talent I hadn't known I possessed. A travel group for seniors planned affordable excursions to destinations I had only dreamed of visiting. For the first time since Thomas died, I was building a life centered around my own needs and desires. The nursing scholarship established with the proceeds from my house was officially launched 6 months after the accident. The hospital held a small ceremony, which Sarah attended as my guest. The first recipient was a single mother working as a nursing assistant while pursuing her RN degree. Her situation reminding me so much of my early years. "This will change her life," Sarah whispered as we watched the young woman accept the award, her hands trembling slightly. "Just like you've changed so many lives throughout your career." In those months of rebuilding, Michael wrote several more letters. Each showed increasing self-awareness and genuine remorse. He never asked for forgiveness or financial reconsideration, only shared his process of understanding how profoundly he had failed as a son. In his 3rd letter, he mentioned that he had begun volunteering at a Seattle hospital, inspired by reflecting on my career. I didn't respond immediately, unsure if reopening that door was wise. But after consulting with the hospital chaplain who had guided me during my initial recovery, I sent a short note acknowledging his letters and efforts. Not offering reconciliation yet, but not closing the possibility either. Jessica's path took a different direction. According to mutual acquaintances, her marriage to Andrew had indeed ended. The revelation of her treatment of me had caused irreparable damage to her carefully constructed image. She had attempted to contact me several times through Marcus. Each message focused on the misunderstanding about my will rather than any genuine concern for my well-being. I felt sadness rather than satisfaction at her situation. The materialistic values I had unknowingly fostered through my constant sacrifices had come to define her, leaving her with a hollow foundation when challenges arose. Perhaps someday she too would recognize this and begin her own journey toward authenticity, but that process would need to come from within her. 9 months after the accident, I received an unexpected visitor at my condominium. The community receptionist called to inform me that Michael was in the lobby, asking if I would be willing to see him. He had tracked me down through Diane, who had consulted me before sharing my new address. After a moment's hesitation, I agreed. The man who entered my home bore little resemblance to the entitled son who had denied me from his comfortable Seattle apartment. This Michael appeared thinner, his expression hesitant and vulnerable. He carried no gifts or flowers, just himself and the weight of his regret. Our conversation was initially awkward, both of us navigating unfamiliar emotional territory. But gradually, as afternoon turned to evening, we began rebuilding something fragile but potentially meaningful. Not the unquestioning mother-son relationship of the past, but a more balanced connection between two adults who had hurt and been hurt. "I can't change what I did," he said as he prepared to leave. "But I'm trying to become someone who would never do those things again." I didn't promise regular contact or immediate forgiveness, but I did agree to remain in communication. Small steps toward whatever our future relationship might become. 1 year after the accident that had nearly taken my life but ultimately gave me freedom, I hosted a small gathering at my condominium. Diane was there, along with Sarah, Marcus, and several friends from my volunteer work and community activities. Michael attended with Rachel, both still working to earn my trust. Jessica had not been invited, having shown no genuine remorse or understanding. The $1,000 I had left her in my will remained unclaimed, her pride apparently preventing her from accepting such a trivial amount. The door remained open should she ever truly wish to walk through it, but I no longer waited by it hoping for her arrival. As I looked around at the people who had chosen to be part of my life, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The family I had now was not defined by biology but by respect, reciprocity, and genuine care. Each person present had demonstrated the true meaning of love, not through empty words or obligation, but through consistent actions and presence. The journey from devastation to rebuilding had been painful but necessary. By finally valuing myself enough to establish boundaries and consequences, I had created space for authentic relationships to flourish. The children I had raised had made their choices, just as I had finally made mine. For anyone who has sacrificed everything for family only to find themselves abandoned when needed most, I hope my story offers both comfort and courage. Family should lift you up, not drain you dry. Love should flow both ways, not just from you to them. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and others, is to stand firmly in your truth, whatever the consequences. The accident nearly took my life, but it gave me something more precious: the strength to finally live it on my own terms. And that has made all the difference. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have given your children another chance? Or do you think some betrayals run too deep for reconciliation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, it's never too late to stand up for yourself and create the life you deserve. Thank you for listening to my journey, and may you find the courage to honor your own worth every single day.